This presentation is all about the methodology chapter, which is probably one of the most important chapters of your dissertation. The methodology chapter is the how, why, and what chapter. Unlike the druids on the picture, you're not going to use all the methods you can think of, throw them in a pot and see what happens. Unless, of course, you're using an explorative approach to research. But even if you do this, you'll have to answer the questions how, why, and what in the methodology chapter. That means you have to tell the reader how you are approaching your research, why are you using the methods you are using, and also reason what other methods you could have used and why you choose not to use those. And then you have to talk about what that means. What exactly are you going to do? How are you going to gather your data? Before I talk more in detail about the particularities of the methodology chapter, I just wanted to show you briefly the allocation of the chapter within the dissertation. As you can see, I'm placing it within a very traditional form of a dissertation. I used the terms theory and methodology as the same heading because some schools want you to talk about theoretical models, paradigms you are using for your research or before you're planning your research, and you'll have to justify your methodology not only based on the literature review but also on the theoretical framework upon which you base your research. Subsfoot states that the methodology is a philosophical stance of worldview that underlies and informs the style of research. Basically, he says that the methodology determines your research design, and there are two different principles that are covered with the methodology. The one is the epistemology, that is the way of insight. This is how you go about finding the truth, how you go about getting information. And the other side is ontology. This is the focus on the actual objects of the research. What are you going to explore? What is the object of your questions? This way of approaching your data, this methodology, can sometimes be based on certain paradigms or theories. And there are two major opposite ends of the pole, if you like, in how these paradigms or how these theories work. The one is positivism and the other one is interpretivism, or sometimes called naturalism. Positivism is what you would traditionally see as science, as undertaking experiments. In positivism, you usually set up hypotheses and test these hypotheses, usually in an experimental environment. While in interpretivism, approaches are usually more explorative, and they can contain strategies like observation, for instance, or field works. You're not approaching the data with hypotheses, but with questions. In the following, I'm going to talk about the structure of the methodology chapter. You'll have to start the methodology chapter with an introduction, which summarizes the results from the literature review and concludes with your research questions or the hypothesis with which you came up from the literature. Subsequently, you need to talk about your conceptual design or your research planning. Firstly, you have to introduce your methods or your instruments and justify why you are using the methods you're using and the instruments you're using. Secondly, you need to talk about your participants or your research subjects or the samples you are chosen, or for instance, if you do experiments, the objects you are using and why you are using them. Justify again how, whom, what, why. Exactly. Tell the reader what you've chosen, why you have chosen, reason it. In the next step, and this is only if appropriate, it means usually it refers to an experimental environment. If you introduce certain variables or certain factors, you'll have to explain the possible impact these factors have on your research process and on the data gathering. So don't forget to introduce those if you use. The next part of your methodology chapter should be the discussion of your pilot study. Talk about possible changes and implications. Did you verify all your methods, or did you have to make adjustments in your methods? Talk about details of data collection and the importance and the limitations of your study. Afterwards, suggest an analysis of your study. How will you go about analyzing the data? And the last part of your methodology chapter should, of course, be the summary of it. Summarize again what you found, what your theories were, where the methods came from, what you found in your pilot study, and how this will impact all your further study and the analysis of your data. This slide shows you the questions your methodology chapter should answer. What was done exactly? How was it done? Tell about the procedures. Why was this approach chosen? That means what other approaches could have been chosen and why did you not use those? With whom did you undertake the research? Talk about participants if you have them. Instruments, talk about the methods you used and why you used those methods. And the type of data. How was it collected and how was it collated? And last but not least, the methodology chapter is also the place to talk about research ethics. That means, has your research been approved by the ethics committee of your faculty or your school? Was consent given by the participants or carers of participants? Did you stick to the ethic guidelines of your department, your institute, or your wider organization? Was the research conducted according to these ethical guidelines? Did you encounter some issues at some points? And if yes, how did you deal with these issues to ensure an ethical research? Don't forget, this part of the research has to be clarified as well. That was all. I hope you found that presentation helpful.